Good morning everyone, it's Kathy Champion and you're back here in my craft room at Random Acts of Crafting. I guess you can probably guess what we're going to talk about today. We're going to discuss inks. Now first I want to make a disclaimer. I'm not a chemist. I do not know the chemical makeup of inks, but I do know what different ones do and how they react. And that's pretty much what I want to cover. As stampers and as card makers and paper crafters, the most important thing to know is what ink to use for what you're doing, what project you're doing. So I'm going to actually start off with the most popular, and I would say my own personal opinion, if I could only afford to buy one ink, I probably would start off with Versamark. And this is exactly what I did start off with when I first started my paper crafting journey. And the reason I say this is a pigment ink. The only thing that you cannot do with this ink, well, there's a couple of things, but what comes to mind the most is you cannot use alcohol markers with it. This is a pigment ink and it sits on top of your paper. I'm going to move some, I'll tell you what, I'm going to explain the inks and then we're going to go back through them and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Any type of pigment ink will sit on top of the paper. It doesn't absorb into the paper. It dries on top of the paper, so it's almost as though when you stamp your image down, the texture of that ink stays raised. Even though you might not be able to feel it, it's there very minutely, but it stays raised on the paper. So whenever you try to do any type of alcohol markers with this, it has a tendency to bleed. So say for an example, if you stamp an image, a simple little image, and then you grab an alcohol marker and start to color, you're going to start seeing a little bleeding in the line of your stamped image. Sometimes it's not drastic, and once in a blue moon you can get away with it, but it's not my go-to ink if I'm going to do any alcohol marker. But this particular ink is very rich. It's very, very vibrant. When you stamp, this is my favorite go-to ink for my sentiments. And the reason for that is because it does look so bold on your paper. So if you're going to stamp an image like that, this is the ink that you want to use. And this was stamped with the Versamark, and this is the Onyx Black. Versamark also has a line of colored inks, and they are called Versamark Clair. And these inks are just like the Versamark. It's a pigment ink, not good for watercoloring, but they are beautiful, beautiful inks. So, and they do have a wide variety of colors, so that's another option. So I'm going to move these out as I explain them. Now, once you move on and you need to delve into some other inks, the next one that I would get would be my Memento. The Memento is a dye ink, and it does exactly what it says. It dyes the paper. So when you stamp something in this, the chemical makeup of this ink settles down into the fibers of the paper. So when it dries, you can use your alcohol markers and it will not move. Now, one thing you do need to know about Memento, a lot of times water base will move this ink, and I'll show you why. I'm going to take let me get a small stamp block. And I'm going to stamp, and this is true for almost any of your pigment inks. I just stamp the stamp block into the ink, and I'm going to use one of my water pens, and there's nothing in here but just water. It's just plain water. And if you notice, look how that ink moves. The water moves the ink. You can use this for coloring. So say for example, this image right here didn't do so well, so if I wanted to come back and touch that up, I could do it with this, just like that. So that's something to keep in mind if you are using any type of dye ink. Water will move it, alcohol will not move it, and it's basically because it is a water-based ink. So water moves water, alcohol moves alcohol. So your dye inks seem to be more of a water base, so alcohol doesn't move them, and vice versa. And I know that it's confusing. Knowing inks and what ink to use has always been a hard thing for people to know what to do. But I'm gonna go through this a little bit more. I just want to kind of introduce you to the different inks. Our next ink is the Versamark. This is a watermark stamp pad. This is a clear ink, and don't look at my pad because this has been used and abused, but this is a very soft foam pad, and the ink is very, very sticky. And this is used for embossing. If you wanted to do a tone-on-tone ink, this would be what you would use. Like, for example, if I wanted to do this Believe stamp, and say I wanted to watermark it all over a black piece of paper, this would stamp, and I could stamp it around all over the paper and let it dry. And when it dries, you're going to see this image kind of come up through the paper, and it's going to be black on black, but you're going to be able to see this. But what this ink is mostly used for is heat embossing, and heat embossing is where you use your embossing powders, and you stamp your image, and then you sprinkle your embossing powder over it and tap it off, and then you use a heat gun to heat set it. And it usually you can use metallics, you can use different colors. Your blacks and your whites are very stark and pristine. It's a beautiful way to put a sentiment on a card, or if you're making a special card, you can do some mighty special details using this type of ink with the embossing powders. Another thing you can use with this is the Perfect Pearls. The Perfect Pearls is a powder, and it comes in different colors, and you can stamp your image. You go in and put a little bit of that powder, colored powder, onto your stamped image, and you use a brush, just a lightweight brush, and you just kind of circle it around, and what it does, it sticks to this watermark ink. And then you can use a larger brush and kind of brush everything away, and you have a beautiful shimmery perfect pearl image by using this. This is just some of the ways that you can use the Versamark ink. Okay, so we got that one covered. The next one, and this one I am new to. I have to admit, I have been meaning to buy one of these for so long, and when I decided I wanted to do a video on different types of ink, I had to go out and get this one. This is a different breed of ink, totally from anything else that's here on my table. The reason for that is this is a permanent ink. This is an ink that will not rub off of ceramic, glass, tiles, plastic, acetate. If you stamped with a VersaFine or a Memento on a piece of acetate, and even if you let it dry, you could still take your finger and rub through it and it would move. Stays on is exactly what it says. It stays on. It is a solvent ink, so it has a property in it that is much like oil painting. It's a solvent. This stains your stamps, so it's very hard to clean off of your stamps. It doesn't damage your stamps, but it is hard to clean off. They do sell a special solution that's supposed to help get this off. This ink also comes with a little cover over it. And you always want to keep this cover pad over top of your Stays On ink. And there we go. And it's a very rich black ink, and we're going to play with it. Now, I have not played with this ink, so I'm going to be playing with it for the first time right here in front of everybody. So y'all wish me luck. Say a prayer. The other kinds of ink, we have our hybrid inks. Now, these inks are advertised to do two things: that they're safe with water-based markers and they're safe to use with your alcohol markers. The only problem that I have with either one of these inks is I don't always get as crisp of an image as I would like. But then that's also true with the Memento. The Memento is not going to give you the same pristine image unless you use a Stamparatus or a Misty, some type of stamping platform. If you use that and you use the Memento, you can stamp it, you know, 2 or 3 times and get a good image. And you probably can with these too, but I've never gotten quite the same out of these as I do using the VersaFine or the Memento. But they're out there and they are good. It says use Nouveau hybrid inks for stamping, ideal to use with water-based and alcohol pens. So all of these are, this one is by Spectrum Noir and it's called Finesse, and this also is a I know that the pad on this one is kind of concaved, so you really have to work the pad around the edges on your stamp because the middle seems to be sunk in, and that always seems to be a little bit of a problem for me. But those are 2 more, and both of these are black. I tried to bring black inks to y'all. If you noticed, I have black, this is black, the Stays On is black, the VersaFine is black. Of course, my VersaFine Clairs, these all come in colors. So I think there's like 24 colors right now that's out for that. The other thing that we have Stampin' Up! Carries ink pads, and these are all dye inks as well. So again, dye inks move with water. So let's take our little stamp block, and I'm just gonna stamp it here. Pick up that beautiful, this is one of the newer colors called Cinnamon Cider. And again, these are great for watercoloring. You can, I'm gonna clean this brush off just to make sure I got that black out of it. And just get a good drop of water to come out and wipe the end of it off. And then I'm gonna get my water flowing one more time. And then a little bit here. Depending on how much water you put down will depend on the degree of your color. But as you can see, you can watercolor with these. And isn't that pretty? Now, if you wanted to put more water, just squeeze your pen, put a little bit more water down, and as you can see, it graduates in color depending on how much water you use. Just like watercolors. So if you don't have watercolors and you've got an assortment of pigment inks, then you can do that. You do need to be mindful and use some watercolor cardstock if you're doing that, because it's thicker and it won't soak the water in quite as bad. But that's another advantage to that. Now the next inks that I would like to discuss are our Distress inks and our Distress Oxide inks. Let me clean my little block off. Now, with the Distress inks, these are very water soluble. So let's just take and stick that in there like that. And let's go back with our water brush and let's squeeze a couple of drops of water on it. And you can just really distress this up and see from where I put it in the pad, it's heavier on some places. The distress inks are so great for using on projects if you want to distress around the edges. These are 2 of my favorite, the Black Soot and the Vintage Photo. The brown of the Vintage Photo and the Black Soot of this one. They work wonderful for that sort of thing. And I love my distress inks, but my biggest collection of my distress are my oxides. And the reason I love the oxides is, again, these blend so beautifully. So if you wanted to blend, let's just say we wanted to, I'm gonna grab one of my little ink brushes, and y'all seen me use these before. You can take your ink and put it down, and you can literally change the look of a piece of paper just by putting this down. And you can pick up your excess off of your mat and These are beautiful. You've seen me do cards where I've masked off the middle of a page and distressed the entire thing, like in a rainbow effect or a sunset. And these inks blend. So if I brought in a yellow, I could blend that yellow with this coral and make it look like a sunset, and it is gorgeous. So that's the one thing that I love about these. I don't use these as much for stamping as I do for blending and edging and things like that. So again, I am giving you my personal opinion of how I use these different inks. You know, you might have totally different uses for yours, but these seem to be the consensus of most people that make cards and scrapbooks and different types of paper items, that this is what they use them for. So I am going to clean up my mess. I like my glass mat for these little demos because it just cleans up so easy. Except stays on. I would not put stays on this because it would not come up. But now let's go ahead and let's do some examples. Let's just go ahead and do some examples of how these inks work. Let's say, and I need a different, let's see, I did pull out a different one. I have this Timeless Tulip, and this is a Stampin' Up set, and y'all seen me use this, but I love this stamp set because this one is called a Distinctive, and what Distinctive means is it has a texture. I don't know if you can see that texture. Let's see if I can put it behind a piece of paper. Maybe you can see it. It has a texture into the stamp. And what that texture allows you to do when you ink it, it allows your stamp to look as though it has been colored, and not just colored with a marker, but shaded. It's like it does an automatic shading, which I think is just gorgeous. So I'm going to turn that over and grab a stamp block. And now we're just going to play with some inks. Now I'm going to ink this up. I usually always look at my stamps to make sure that I've got a good coverage. And we're going to put this, let's see, we need a mat under here because we are dealing with a photopolymer stamp. Unlike the cling stamps, you don't need to put any matting under it. But sometimes you get a much better image with your photopolymer if you have something cushioned underneath it. And you might ask me, how did I learn that? I learned that by using my Misty. I couldn't figure out why I got such a better image with my Misty using these stamps, and that's why. But see what I mean about the Distinctive? See how it looks like it's automatically shadowed and shaded and everything for you? I love these stamps for that reason, because they always stamp up so beautiful and they look like they've already been colored by using colored ink. So, but let's go ahead and we're going to do it in some other colors too. Let's go ahead and try it. I'm going to clean it off over here. You always want to clean your stamps in between your colors because you do not want to cross-contaminate your inks. So I always make sure that I've got my stamp cleaner right here so that I can clean up my stamps. Now this is the Distress Oxide. Now like I said, I don't always use Distress Oxide for stamping images, but with that being said, let's see how well it works. Now see, I got a little bit of nakedness in the middle and I didn't get it there. Probably because the middle of the stamp, because these pads are not perfectly even. You can see how it looks a little concave in the middle. So let's try it again. I'm going to put a little extra pressure right there in that middle. And that's much better. But see the difference in the color? And that's a gorgeous color for that tulip. So the only thing you're going to have to remember if you're using the Distress Oxides is you're going to need to give it plenty of time to dry. Unlike the dye ink, that's going to dry really quick. That's dry. This one is going to be wet. See what I mean? So I'm not even going to touch that last one. But the Distress Oxides, they do dry very slow. And the reason they do that, that's what makes them so good for blending, because they stay wet long enough for you to be able to move to your next color and be able to blend it. So anytime you use your oxides or distress inks, you're going to want to make sure you give them time to dry. Alright, we're going to move on to something a little different. I think I'm going to go ahead and show you what I get with the hybrids. And then we can go ahead and move those out of our way and, you know, move on with that, because those are, they're, like I said, they're okay. They're probably not my favorite inks, but if you have them and you can make them work. Now I've lost the top to my ink. Oh, I do this all the time. I'm sure y'all never do. Okay, let's grab this Nouveau, and this is called Black Shadow, so it is their black. The black is black. And I'm going to do a sentiment with this one. And I think what I'll do is, let's do this little sentiment right here. And what I'm going to do is I think I'll put it up here at the top, because I'm going to stamp it in the hybrid, then I'm going to stamp it in the Memento, and then stamp it in the Versamark, because I want to show you exactly how it looks depending on what ink you use. Okay, so, oops, might help if I turn it around. And this one says Happy Easter, Happy Spring, Happy everything. So I'm going to give it time to transfer. And you can see it's not great. I mean, it's there, but it's not super great. So, clean it. And let's put the top back on that one. Let's go ahead and try the Memento. And I'm going to do the same thing. I am going to move it over the ink pad like that. And I'm going to come right up under it and I'm going to stamp it. Now that one's stamped a little better. Do y'all see that? I like that one. It's a little bit crisper. But now I'm going to clean that off yet one more time. And let's go ahead and put up the Memento. And let's bring out our Versamark. And just like I have been doing, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do tap, tap, tap. And then we're going to stamp this one. And see what I mean? This one is richer, it's blacker, it's more vibrant than either one of these. This one was not so good, that was a little better. That one is gorgeous. That's my opinion. I don't know. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you agree. So for sentiments, I still love my Versamark. My personal preference. Everybody has their own ideas of what works for them. But, you know, sometimes you have to play with the different inks. You have to find what works for you. And again, like I told you at the beginning of this, these are only my opinion and what I find that works good for me. And I just thought it would be fun to bring this to you. Now this is the other one. This is the Spectrum Noir Finesse. And this is also a hybrid. So let's go ahead and give it a fair shake. And I'm going to move it around on this ink pad because we know that it's very concave in the middle. And let's stamp it right here. And that's not too bad. I mean, it's good, but it's not as good as this one. So that is my take on sentiment inks. So I think the next thing that we want to do is maybe, oh, I know, we're going to do a little bit of heat embossing, and I'm going to show you with the Versamark how that works. So let me grab my filter and my embossing powder and some paper, and I will be right back. Okay, we are back. I'm going to go ahead and move my different inks out of my way. We will get back to these in just a little bit. But since we are going to talk Versamark, I'm going to show you the most popular way to use the Versamark ink. And I'm going to start off with a black piece of paper. And the reason for that is I want to show you how you need to treat your paper, and I want to show you how to stamp it, and then also how to heat emboss it. Now, when you get ready to heat emboss, you do need a heat tool. It took me a while before I understood the entire concept of heat embossing, and I think for a lot of new crafters there's times that things don't always make as much sense, because you hear about different type of embossing. You hear about you know, there's all kinds of embossing. You can emboss with a stylus like this. You know, with one of these, you can emboss your flowers. You can cut them out and use a soft mat, something like I use the stamp on, and work your flowers. That's a type of embossing. You can use a die cut and embossing machine that has the rollers, and use an embossing folder, put your paper between it, roll it through. That's embossing. There are so many, but this particular method that uses the Versamark stamp pad is heat embossing, and you have to have the ink, the powder, and the heat tool. So it is kind of a three-step program. Not only that, you need this little powder tool. These are sold by just about every craft store. I'm not even sure what mine is. I know Stampin' Up! Used to have one called an Embossing Buddy. I didn't see it in the catalog this year, so I'm not sure. But this is an anti-static powder, because believe it or not, paper picks up our fingerprints. Paper picks up static, and everywhere there's static or fingerprint, that embossing powder will stick to it. And then when you heat it, you will have particles of this on places you did not want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same. Let's do the word believe, because that's such a pretty word. And how pretty is that going to be done in gold on this beautiful black piece of paper. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually, and I usually do this, I'm going to turn the ink pad up and take it to my stamp. That way I know that I can work the ink completely over my stamp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this around like I want it, and I am going to go up here to the top, because that's where I want this to fall, and stamp. Now I'm going to put pressure on it, because I want that impression to really leave a good stamp. So I am going to really put down some pressure on this one. And up. Oh, and that's beautiful. I think you can even see that from the camera, and I haven't even brought it up close. But see what a beautiful image that is. Now, this ink stays sticky for a while, so you don't have to rush to do this. But what I like to do is I bring over a coffee filter. You don't want to waste your embossing powder. So for me, and this is the Brutus Monroe Gilded, and I love this. It's a rich, just a very rich gold. And all you do is sprinkle a good amount. And don't be afraid of sprinkling. You can dump the whole box, the whole thing on there. It's going to be okay, because you're not wasting it. You're going to put all of that excess. So all you're going to have is just what you have right here on the image. Now I like to tap it and thump it. to try to get as much of that off, the excess, as I possibly can. And then I just pour this right back into my little container. Now I always make sure that I put my embossing powder up before I turn on my heat tool. Now one thing you want to do is make sure that you heat up your heat gun, because it's important. And if you have a heat gun that has 2 settings, always do your embossing powder on the highest setting. So I'm going to turn this on. It's going to be noisy, but I'm going to give myself about 30 seconds to get this heated. So here we go. I'm just holding it away from me while I'm letting it heat up. And a good 30 seconds is what you need, because you really want this to get good and hot. The hotter it is when you put it to this embossing powder, the faster it's going to melt and the more beautiful it's going to be. So let's go ahead and try it. Maybe it's been about 30 seconds. It's starting to change. Take your time. You're not in a hurry. Let it melt as you're moving it around. And you can see as it melts, you see how beautiful it's turning? And stay in that area until you see the complete melting, and then move on to the next area. And then I usually like to go behind it, and I go back and look and make sure that I've gotten it all heat set, and that looks really good. And then we can turn off our noise, and look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? And that's the wonderful thing. Now, if you notice, I do have some warping of my paper, but don't worry. You can lay a stamp block like that on it and just let it sit on your cool mat for a few minutes. And this is glass, so it is cool. And that will flatten out in no time. Now, I find heat embossing to be so gratifying. Some people don't like it because it is a process, but I have always been a person in my crafting. I love a process. I love the work that I put into something to make it pretty. Anybody can sit down and do a quick and easy card, but when you make a card for someone and you take the time to hand color, to use your colored pencils and your watercolors or your inks or your alcohol markers or whatever your medium is that you like to color with, I think it just says so much. So that, I think, turned out spectacular. Now we're going to put something else under that, and I think what I'm going to do is grab a different stamp. And let's, out of the same stamp set, and this is the one that I got just recently. I think what I want to do is I want to put Believe in the Miracle of Christmas. I love that. So we're going to grab that one off. And yes, I know we're not doing Christmas, but it is still Christmas in July, so I guess we can get away with this. I'm going to do one more and use the white, or maybe the rainbow. I wonder how the rainbow would look. That's got a lot of sparkles in it, and sometimes that doesn't do so good. This icicle, this is something else that I wanted to tell you about. You have clear embossing powder, and a lot of times, like if this one was clear, it looks white, but if this was clear, it would say right back here where it says Glacier White, it would say crystal clear. And anytime you have a clear embossing powder, you can stamp with a colored ink, and whatever you stamp, I tell you what, let's do that. Let's do this one in a color. And we'll just do it on a different piece of paper. How about just like this? Let's get our Versamark. Let's grab another stamp block. And I'm going to ink that up in this Versamark once again. Oh, you know what? I didn't want to do the Versamark. I wanted to do it in the colored. That's okay. We'll just clean that off. And let's grab this Stampin' Up, and this is a Rocco Rose. I love this Rocco Rose. I think it's such a pretty color. So let's just go ahead and ink it up in that pretty pink. Just like that. And this can show you how you can use your colored inks for heat embossing. And if you've got a good variety of colored inks, you won't need anything but a clear embossing powder. And Brutus Monroe's clear is called Icicle. And I love this. I think it's so pretty. So I'm going to bring this little filter back over, and I'm going to brush it off and make sure I don't cross-contaminate. And we're going to sprinkle this on. And you know what I didn't do? I didn't use my powder tool. So you may see, maybe not with this being clear. I think we might be okay. So let's see what happens. I'm going to dump this back in here. And let's put our lid on, and then we'll go ahead and when you're dealing with a small piece of paper like this, you might want to get your tweezers, and that's if I can find mine, because when you hang on to this piece of paper, and if you're too close to holding onto it with your fingers, and you get it too close to that heat tool, you can very well, and I don't see my tweezers in here. Okay, we'll try doing it without them. Let's, it won't take us long to heat this up since it already been heated. So here we go. And always try to hold the heat tool this way and not up here at the back. Like this. Alright, I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to try to do it right here. It gets very, very hot. But it is melting. And see how it's picking up that ink color. I definitely need my tweezers. I don't think I got that melted all the way because it was too hot to hold, but if I had my little tweezers, I would have held onto the edge of this, and it did smuck it just a little bit where it flew across my desk. But as you can see, with a clear embossing powder, you can use any color ink. And see what I mean? It messed up when it blew across my desk. But as you can see, this was a mighty small piece of paper to hold on to with that heat gun. That thing gets very hot, so if you're using one, use extreme caution. Now, earlier I stamped the Believe with just the Versamark ink, and I didn't heat emboss. I just left it plain. And that's what I mean about the tone on tone. I don't know if you can see that, if the light is catching it or not. But I can see it. I don't think you're seeing it. But anyway, that's what a tone on tone looks like. It will just give you a faint watermark, which is what the ink is called, watermark stamp pad. So that is covering quite a few of our inks and what they do. Now, I said I promised you I was going to do something with the stays on. And I am. I'm going to stamp on this, get my work surface cleaned off a little bit, because embossing powders are gritty and you do get them on your surface, so you know, just be aware of that. There's a hole right there in that bag, so I'm going to stamp right here, and I want to do something simple. So let's just do let's do this phrase. Now I know this is going to stain my stamp, and I'm not real happy about that, but I do want to show you if you wanted to do tiles on coasters or whatever, anything like that, and you needed to stamp it on a glass, say you were doing a picture frame and you wanted to put names on the picture frame that would fall underneath people's pictures, this would be the perfect place to do that. And you would need the StazOn ink in order to make that happen. So I'm going to pick that up right about there. I'm not going to worry about it being straight, but one thing you do have to worry about with this ink, because I'm doing it on a slippery surface, you really can't wiggle. There's no place for wiggling. So I'm going to put that down right there. And this thing smells like almond extract. It makes me want to go bake something. Okay, we're going to ink it up. And then I'm just going to bring it straight down. I'm just going to hold it there just for a minute. And that's not perfect, but you know, that's not bad. I'm going to bring it over here and try my best to clean this off as best I can. And it will definitely stain your stamp, so you know, be mindful of that. It's not going to hurt your stamp, but it will definitely stain it. As you can see, not too bad. I don't mind a stained stamp. I always say a stained stamp is a very loved stamp, and usually a loved stamp means you have used it quite a bit. So I'm going to put that cover back over this ink. I don't know how they make that stuff smell so good, but it really does. Now I'm going to try wiping off up here. You see, it really doesn't want to wipe off very well, but I got it because it hadn't dried yet. But now I want to go ahead and I want to stamp in Memento. And I'm going to stamp the same thing. I'm going to stamp it down here. And I'm going to show you the difference. Yeah, as soon as I put that down, it didn't stick, it moved. Look at that. Yep. But you can see, you cannot get a good image on a piece of acetate with your with that ink. You can't get it on there with a hybrid or a Versamark, which is a pigment ink. You have to use a StazOn if you're going to use it on a acetate, glass, ceramic, tin, any type of unporous surface. I guess that would be the way to say it. If you're using it on a surface that has no pores, then the StazOn is the ink that you need, because it's going to live on the surface because you don't have any pores for it to sink into, and it's going to dry and it's going to last. Now I don't want to rub this yet, but I do want to show you this. See, that rubs right off. So I can easily take my little towel and I can just wipe that away, and that would never stay no matter how long you let it dry. Unlike this would probably stay for a good long time. It's not perfect, but you know, it was the first time I've used it, so I need to practice with it a little bit more. But I thought, how neat would it be to make some coasters? You could do some monogram coasters with some monogram stamps, make a beautiful Christmas gift, a homemade Christmas gift. Just something, I'm always thinking ahead of a homemade gift that you can give somebody that is personalized. I think that's always so important when we're doing handmade gifts. But I'm not going to hold y'all any longer. I did want to just come to you briefly and kind of explain the whole thing with the different inks. And I'm going to set them back out here again. I'm going to move my embossing powders because this was not an embossing video. It was inks. that was where my emphasis was going. And I hope that you were able to learn something. Here is our different types of our black inks that we would probably reach for the most. We have our Versafine. I'll move this over here. We have our Memento, our Versamark, and our StazOn. And this is in the order that I would buy them. I would buy this first, that second, depending. If you are a person that likes heat embossing, you may want to get this one next after that one. But if you use alcohol markers, you're definitely going to want one of these. Also, if you're wanting the hybrid inks, there's a hybrid, and this is a hybrid. And then we also have our Distress inks and our Distress Oxide, and also our Versafine Clair, which is the same properties of the Versafine. Also, too, I wanted to let you know that many of these inks, this is the Versafine Onyx, the Black Onyx re-inker, and this is the Memento Tuxedo Black re-inker. And I also have a re-inker for this one, and I have a white ink that I use that is a pigment ink as well, and it is put out by Brutus, Monroe, and I have a re-inker for it. So if you have inks that you use a lot, it would be very well to get, and a lot of them come in these little ink spots. And these are little tiny ones. And let me show you what a clean Versamark pad's supposed to look like. Unlike my big one that has seen its better days, but it still works, and as long as it works, I'm going to keep using it, even if it does look bad. But I hope that this video has helped you understand the uses of inks. And if you have any questions about any of the inks that I covered in here, or even some questions about some other inks, if I don't know, I will definitely do the research, and I will get back with you and let you know what I found out. My desire in my channel here is to inspire and to teach, and I'm hoping that I have done both in showing you what you can do with the right and proper ink, that you can build things, make things beautiful, and just with a few products. So until we craft again, may God richly bless you and keep you, and may everything that you do and say bring glory to Him. He is so worthy of our honor and our praise. And until we craft again, bye-bye.